September 12, 1943. Near Salerno, Italy. Cold rain hammered the shattered olive groves as the 36th Infantry Division pushed inland. Mud clung to boots, shell fragments hissed overhead. And somewhere in that chaos, Private First Class Raymond Kessler slammed his palm against the side of his rifle, a temperamental M1 Garand that had jammed for the third time that morning. The bolt was half open, stuck smeared with wet carbon. His squad was moving through a ravine where German machine gun nests cut the air into ribbons. Every second counted. And here he was, crouched behind a toppled stone wall, digging mud out of the chamber, with a gloved finger whispering curses drowned out by rifle cracks and mortar thumps. He yanked the operating rod back. Nothing. Another soldier ahead shouted for covering fire. Someone screamed for a medic. Kessler's pulse hammered in his ears as he stared at his rifle, the weapon American soldiers proudly called the best battle implement ever devised. But today it felt like anything but. The enemy fire intensified. A German MG-42 roared from the ridge, shredding branches above his head. Kessler ducked instinctively, and in that brief pause, something hit him. The rifle wasn't failing because of battle damage. This was carbon fouling. Weeks of inconsistent powder charges in the ammunition had left residue thick as soot inside the action. Combine that with the rain, the mud, the constant firing, and the M1 was choking. A semi-automatic rifle that failed to cycle wasn't just an inconvenience. It could mean the difference between holding a position and losing it, between life and death. He slammed the bolt forward manually, forced the rifle to fire one round, just one. Enough to help his squad leapfrog across the ravine. Enough to keep moving. But each shot required brute force, each reload a gamble. By the time evening fog rolled in over the hills, Kessler had survived, but the rifle slung over his shoulder felt heavier than ever. What the men in Italy didn't know, not yet, was that hundreds of miles away in a quiet laboratory, a bespectacled ordnance chemist named Dr. Edward P. Kingsley was staring at the same problem from a very different angle. He didn't hear the MG-42s. He didn't see the mud. But he saw the fouling, every microscopic grain of it. And he believed he could fix it. He believed he could save lives. What Kingsley didn't realize was that the solution he was about to create wouldn't just make the M1 Garand more reliable. It would transform it, turning America's semi-automatic workhorse into a weapon that could decide firefights before they even began, a rifle that could keep firing when everything around it was collapsing, a rifle that would give U.S. infantry something no other army possessed at scale: sustained, repeatable, unstoppable firepower. And it would all begin with a tiny change, so small that soldiers in the field would never notice it. A new powder charge that burned just clean enough, just consistently enough, to alter the course of the war. October 1943. The air smelled of solvent, brass shavings, and hot metal fresh from the test range. Oscilloscopes crackled softly. Behind blast-proof glass, rifles clattered on mechanical rigs, endlessly cycling, endlessly firing, endlessly jamming. And in the middle of it all stood Dr. Edward P. Kingsley. Tie loosened, sleeves rolled up, a pencil behind one ear, and a smudge of graphite across his cheek. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't a gunsmith. He was a chemist, one of the many quiet experts the U.S. Army had pulled from universities, research labs, and private companies as war engulfed the world. His battlefield was a steel workbench. His enemies were unstable powders, inconsistent burn rates, and fouling so stubborn it could defeat even the M1 Garand's rugged tolerance. Kingsley leaned over a ballistic chart pinned to the wall. Red lines showed the expected pressure curve of the standard IMR powder used in .30-06 cartridges. Blue lines showed what the rifles were actually experiencing in the field. The curves didn't match. Not even close. Some charges produced too much pressure too quickly, slamming the operating rod violently rearward. Others burned too slowly or too coolly, failing to cycle the action at all. And every variation left behind unburned grains, tiny fragments that accumulated inside the chamber, gas port, and receiver. Under ideal conditions, a rifle could chew through dozens of clips before the buildup mattered. But war was not ideal. Rain, mud, dust, rapid fire, cold, heat. Every shot left a little more residue. Every residue grain made the next jam more likely. Kingsley muttered softly to himself, "It's the fouling. Always the fouling." Across the room, Lieutenant Harold Vickers, a weapons tester with forearms thick from years of handling rifles, approached with a clipboard. 22 stoppages, Vickers said, tapping the metal counter. And that's with freshly cleaned guns. Kingsley didn't flinch. "Show me the residue." Vickers dumped a tray of darkened powder flakes and carbon dust under a magnifier. Kingsley leaned in. The particles were chunky, irregular, poorly combusted. He frowned. "This isn't a mechanical failure," he said quietly. "It's chemistry." He scribbled formulas, adjusted ratios, crossed them out, wrote new ones. A dozen powder blends sat in labeled jars on his bench, experiments that had burned too hot, too dirty, too unevenly. What he needed was something different. A powder that ignited smoothly, burned completely, and produced a consistent gas pulse for the Garand's long-stroke piston. Something that wouldn't leave behind flakes that turned rifles into iron coffins. He picked up 2 jars, IMSR 4895, and a modified experimental blend designated PB-X3. Side by side, their grains looked identical. But Kingsley knew the truth. PB-X3 incorporated stabilizers and deterrents that slowed the burn rate just enough to produce a uniform pressure curve. It was cleaner, cooler, more predictable. The problem? It wasn't battle-tested. Not yet. He glanced at the test rifles beyond the glass. "These soldiers," he said under his breath, "deserve a rifle that fires when they need it. Not when the powder feels like cooperating." Vickers raised an eyebrow. "You want to run the blend?" Kingsley nodded once. "Load 20 shots. If it cycles clean, we might be onto something." Vickers moved quickly. A technician seated behind the reinforced window-loaded clips of PB-X3.30-06. The rifle snapped into place on the recoil test rig. The countdown light blinked. 3, 2, 1. The rifle barked to life. Once. Twice. 5 shots. 10. 15. 20. Smooth. Even. No jams. No sluggish bolt. And when Vickers cracked open the receiver, he paused. There was barely any residue. Kingsley didn't celebrate. Not yet. But for the first time in months, he allowed himself a thin smile. Because he knew what this meant. If the tests held. If the powder worked. If it could survive cold, heat, mud, rapid fire, salt air, shipping delays, mass production. Then every American soldier in Europe and the Pacific could carry a rifle that fired as reliably on the 200th round as it did on the first. A rifle that might save men like Private Kessler. December 3, 1943. Aberdeen Proving Ground, Field Test Range 7. A freezing wind tore across the test yard, carrying the metallic echo of rifle fire and the clatter of brass casings bouncing off steel plates. In front of a long trench filled with cold, black mud, Lieutenant Harold Vickers stomped his boots and rubbed his hands together. "Perfect weather," he muttered. "If this powder's going to fail, today'll do it." Kingsley stood beside him, wrapped in a thick wool coat, breath fogging in the winter air. His glasses were already speckled with wind-driven dirt. Behind them, a line of test rifles, some newly machined, some deliberately battered, sat ready for the harshest reliability gauntlet the army could devise. They weren't just testing accuracy. They weren't testing comfort. They were testing whether the new powder could keep the M1 Garand running when every rule of maintenance was violated on purpose. A corporal dipped one rifle in the mud trench until the barrel vanished beneath the sludge. The weapon came out dripping, the stock stained dark and wet. Another rifle was packed with sand. A third was dragged across icy gravel to simulate a battlefield drop. Kingsley swallowed hard. Scientific tests were one thing. But watching these rifles, machined steel, precision parts, months of design work, being abused felt like sacrilege to him. Vickers clapped him on the shoulder. Relax, document. If the rifle dies here, it saves a soldier out there. Kingsley nodded. He knew that. But knowing didn't make watching any easier. The first test rifle, coated in mud, chamber loaded with PB/X3 rounds, was handed to Sergeant Alan Marsh, a veteran with forearms like cable and a reputation for breaking rifles just by handling them. On your command, Marsh said. Vickers raised his hand. Fire. The rifle barked once, sharp, clean. Then again. And again. The action cycled with a steady metallic rhythm, flinging mud from the operating rod as it fired. Marsh fired 10 shots. 20. 30. Still cycling. Still running. Kingsley leaned instinctively closer. Residue. Marsh cracked open the receiver. Minimal. Damn minimal. The second rifle came forward, this one coated in sand, so fine it clung to every crevice. Kingsley winced as Marsh slammed a new clip into the gritty receiver. Fire. Click. Boom. Cycle. Boom. Cycle. 20 rounds in rapid succession. Sand flew in every direction as the bolt snapped forward and back like a piston in a clean engine. Vickers gave a low whistle. I've seen rifles choke on half that grit. The third rifle, the one dragged across gravel, performed flawlessly as well. But Kingsley wasn't smiling. Not yet. He wanted more. He wanted certainty. Let's run the pressure test, he said quietly. Vickers frowned. You sure? We've never done that outdoors in winter. Kingsley nodded. If the powder stays stable in the cold, we're done here. They wheeled out the instrumented test rifle, fitted with a pressure gauge that measured the gas impulse driving the M1's operating system. The technician loaded PB/X3 test rounds, hands shaking from the cold. The rifle fired. The gauge needle jumped, smoothly, predictably, exactly along the curve Kingsley had drawn on his chart. No spikes. No dips. No inconsistencies. That was it. The moment he'd waited for. Vickers stared at the gauge, then at Kingsley. Doc, you just fixed the Garand. Kingsley exhaled slowly, the cloud of warm breath drifting away into the winter air. He didn't speak. He didn't brag. He simply watched as the rifle on the stand breathed clouds of steam into the cold sky, firing round after round without hesitation. He imagined Private Kessler somewhere in Italy, mud on his uniform, carbon smears on his hands, fighting for inches of ground under machine gun fire. He imagined a rifle that ran clean, shot after shot. Because of what they did here today. Send it for final evaluation, Kingsley said quietly. His voice was steady. Resolved. Because he knew the truth now. If the army approved this powder, if production ramped up in time, the Garand would become something extraordinary. A rifle that simply would not quit. January 14, 1944. Washington, D.C., Office of the Chief of Ordnance. The room smelled faintly of pipe smoke and old paper, far removed from the Cold mud of Aberdeen or the scorched olive groves of Italy. Mahogany desks, stacked folders, and a giant wall map of global supply routes filled the space. Beneath flickering fluorescent lights, Kingsley stood rigidly at attention, clutching a metal case packed with ballistic charts, test data, and the future of the M1 Garand. Across the desk sat Colonel Arthur McClendon, head of small arms development. Gray hair clipped short, uniform immaculate, eyes sharp as rifle sights. A man who weighed every request not in theory, but in logistics, pounds of powder, months of production, ships, trains, factories, bottlenecks. You're telling me, McClendon said slowly, tapping the lid of the case, that your new blend reduces fouling by, what is this, 80%? 92.5, Kingsley corrected softly. McClendon raised an eyebrow. That precise? Kingsley swallowed. Yes, sir. A second officer, Major Lyle Patterson, flipped through Kingsley's reports. These test results. They're impressive. Almost too impressive. He looked up. How do we know Aberdeen didn't get lucky? Kingsley felt the question like a jab to the ribs. He had expected it. Because we didn't run one test, he said. We ran 60. Different temperatures, different humidity, different rifles. The results were consistent across all conditions. McClendon leaned back in his chair, folding his hands. Consistency is what wins wars. He stood and walked to a filing cabinet. When he returned, he dropped a thick stack of incident reports onto the desk. Do you know what these are, Doctor? Kingsley skimmed the labels. Field complaints. Jam reports. After-action summaries describing carbon buildup thick enough to stop a fight cold. Italy. The Pacific. North Africa. One report caught his eye, weapon failure during assault through ravine. Bolt seized due to heavy fouling. Manual cycling required under fire. He didn't need the name. He didn't need the unit. He felt the weight of it, another Kessler. Another soldier somewhere trying to force a jammed rifle to fire when seconds meant everything. McClendon watched him silently, gauging the reaction. Then he opened Kingsley's case. Charts spread across the polished desk. Burn curves. Pressure graphs. Photographs of immaculate rifle chambers after full clips of PB-X3. Patterson spoke again. If we approve this powder, every ammunition plant has to reconfigure. Every shipment recalculated, every factory retrained. That's a massive undertaking. Kingsley nodded. Yes, Major. But every day we wait, men carry rifles that foul sooner than they should. McClendon tapped his fingers, thinking hard. Tell me something honest, Doctor. Will this powder hold up on Okinawa? In the Philippines? In sub-zero conditions during the Ardennes? Will it deliver exactly the same performance on the first million rounds as the next million? Kingsley didn't hesitate. Yes, sir. It will. Silence. The room felt as still as the seconds before a rifle trigger breaks. Finally, McClendon reached for a pen, scribbled his signature across a requisition form, and stamped it with the heavy brass seal of the Ordnance Department. Effective immediately, he said, sliding the document across the desk. PB-X3 will replace IMR powder in all .30-06. Ammunition manufactured for frontline deployment. Kingsley exhaled slowly, relief washing over him like warm sunlight. Not joy. Not triumph. Something deeper. Something quieter. Because this wasn't about credit. It wasn't about accolades. It was about rifles that would fire when needed. Soldiers who would live because their weapon didn't choke. Men who would survive assaults, ambushes, night fights, and mud-choked valleys because a tiny grain of powder burned the right way. As he gathered his papers, McClendon added, Doctor, this change. It may very well win battles. Perhaps even shorten this war. Kingsley paused at the doorway. I just want the rifles to work, he said. Nothing more. But McClendon knew better. This was the kind of quiet innovation that altered battlefields. And out there, across the ocean, the men of the U.S. infantry were about to discover what a truly reliable Garand felt like. March 8th. The night was damp and strangely quiet, too quiet for the front. Thin mist clung to the shattered farmhouses and cratered fields, softening the distant thumps of artillery. In a foxhole carved into the clay-like soil, Private First Class Raymond Kessler sat cleaning the rifle he no longer trusted. He popped open the receiver and frowned at the stubborn gray film in the chamber. Same problem, every day, he thought. Corporal Jimmy Harlow slid into the foxhole beside him, boots caked with fresh mud. He carried two things, a steaming canteen cup of weak coffee, and a wooden crate marked with fresh black stenciling. Mail run came in, Harlow said, wiping rain off his helmet. And supply brought these brand new ammo shipments from the States. Kessler looked at the crate. What's wrong with the old stuff? Harlow shrugged. Apparently nothing. But apparently everything. He pried open the lid with his bayonet. Inside were neatly layered .30-06 cartridges, shinier, cleaner, and faintly different. The markings on each brass casing looked unfamiliar, a new factory code. A batch number he didn't recognize. Kessler raised an eyebrow. This stuff looks, I dunno, different. Quartermaster said it's a new blend, Harlow said. Something to keep these Garands running in this mud bath of a country. Kessler snorted. I'll believe it when I see it. The two loaded clips as darkness thickened. A few yards away, the platoon sergeant moved through the foxholes telling men to get some rest, there would be another push at dawn. Kessler slid a fresh clip into his rifle. The bolt snapped forward with a satisfying metallic clack. He liked that sound. He just didn't hear it often enough without having to wrestle the action clean. As the mist settled and the night deepened into a cold, silent curtain, Kessler rested against the muddy wall and drifted into a shallow, uneasy sleep. Dawn. March 9th. Gray light washed across the olive groves as the platoon advanced. German artillery began probing the fields again. Shells whining overhead before punching into the wet ground with heavy thuds. Kessler moved low, rifle ready. They reached a line of broken stone walls. And that's when the first MG-42 opened up, its roar slicing the quiet like a buzz saw. Bullets shattered the stones inches above their heads. The squad hit the ground instantly. Return fire, the lieutenant shouted. Kessler popped up, braced the M1 against the wall, and squeezed the trigger. Boom, chank. The rifle cycled perfectly. He fired again. And again. Boom, chank, boom, chank. The action was smooth, shockingly smooth. No lag, no sluggish bolt, no hesitation. Another burst of fire. Kessler shifted positions, mud splashing around his boots. He kept firing, reliable, steady shots that pinned down the German machine gunners. The bolt kept slamming forward like a heartbeat. A beautiful, consistent heartbeat. Holy hell, he muttered, firing again. It's actually working. Harlow, lying beside him, fired his own Garand. Mine too. Whatever they put in this ammo, keep it coming. The squad pushed forward. No jams. No failures. The rifles sang in unison, 8-shot rhythms echoing across the ruins. Even during the mad dash across the clearing, Kessler reloaded under fire without fear. The rifle felt different, cleaner, lighter, alive. For the first time in months, he trusted it. And on that chaotic morning near Anzio, something became clear to the men of the 36th Infantry Division. Their rifles were no longer fighting against them. They were fighting with them. Behind every clean shot. Behind every smooth cycle. Behind every jam that didn't happen, was a quiet chemist thousands of miles away. A man they would never meet. Whose name they would never hear. But whose work was now shaping every firefight. Kessler didn't know about PB-X3. He didn't know about Kingsley. He only knew that, at last, the Garand was the rifle it was meant to be. And as German fire began to falter, as the squad pressed forward with confidence instead of hesitation, the truth became undeniable. A tiny change in powder had changed the battle. January 1944. Anzio beachhead, Italy. Cold rain hammered the shoreline, turning the sand into a slurry of mud that clung to boots like wet cement. The thunder of distant naval guns rolled through the fog, followed by the crackle of German Nebelwerfer rockets streaking overhead. In a shallow foxhole carved behind a shattered stone wall, Private First Class Leo Martinez, 3rd Infantry Division, slapped a fresh en-bloc clip into his M1 Garand. The steel pinged softly as it locked in place. But something was different now, subtle, almost imperceptible, unless you'd fought with the earlier rifles. When Martinez pulled back the charging handle, the bolt didn't grind or hesitate. It snapped forward with a clean, oily precision that felt confident, deliberate, ready. He exhaled slowly and peeked over the wall. German paratroopers, green smocks, FG-42 rifles, helmets netted with burlap, emerged from the haze, advancing toward the American line with short, bounding rushes. Martinez steadied the rifle. A breath. A heartbeat. A squeeze. Crack. The Garand barked sharply. The rifle stayed smooth in his hands, cycling with a crisp mechanical ka-chink, launching a spent casing into the mud beside him. No extra smoke puffed from the chamber. No sting of burnt carbon dust in his eyes. The action remained slick, even in the cold, even in the rain. He fired again. And again. And again. 6 rounds in rapid succession. Each shot spaced by only a flash of muzzle fire and his steady breathing. The rifle worked like a living extension of him, never stuttering, never choking on carbon like the older loads sometimes had. To his left, Sergeant Tom Brackett watched the young private work. "Hell, Martinez," he shouted over the gunfire, "save some for the rest of us." But Brackett wasn't just joking, he was noticing something. Martinez wasn't pausing to smack the op rod, or yank the bolt, or clear a failure to feed. He was simply firing. And firing. And firing. The Germans, caught in the open, faltered under the storm of semi-automatic fire pouring from the American line. Every squad had at least one man like Martinez, young, aggressive, empowered by a rifle that now worked with the ruthlessness of a machine. Nearby, a squad leader leaned toward his radio man. "They're shooting like they got 10 bars over there," he muttered. And in a way, they did. The chemists back in Maryland, Morse, Banta, McFarlane, would never see this muddy field. They'd never hear the hiss of incoming shells or watch tracer rounds rip the night. But their fingerprints were all over this moment. Their new propellant charge, cooler burning, cleaner, more stable, was doing exactly what it was designed to do. Keep the rifle firing. Keep American infantry alive. Keep the line from breaking. A burst from a German MG-42 shredded the wall above Martinez, showering him with stone fragments. He ducked, then rose smoothly, shouldering the rifle once more. Ping. The empty clip arced into the mud. He slammed in another. The battle raged on. But Martinez felt something most soldiers in 1942 did not: trust. Trust that the rifle in his hands would run. Trust that every pull of the trigger would bring a response. Trust that he didn't need to fight his own weapon while fighting the enemy. Rain battered the trench. Shells howled overhead. And the Garand kept working, shot after shot, magazine after magazine, its reliability no longer a gamble but a certainty. And that certainty changed everything. Because the frontline rifle of the U.S. Army had finally become the weapon John Garand always intended. And the one the American infantry desperately needed. June 15, 1944. Saipan, Pacific Theater. Dawn crawled over the ridgeline in a smear of red and gold, lighting the jagged coral cliffs and the smoke drifting from smoldering palm trunks. The Marines of the 2nd Division tightened their grips on their M1 Garands as the eerie quiet settled, too quiet. Every veteran thought. Captain Robert "Red" Callahan adjusted his binoculars. He knew what was coming before he saw it. "Stand ready," he whispered. Then it hit. A sudden, primal roar erupted from the Tree line as hundreds of Japanese infantry surged forward in a bonsai. Charge, bayonets fixed. Officers waving swords, rifles clutched tight. All sprinting into the teeth of American defensive lines. Machine guns opened up immediately. But it was the Garands, thousands of them, that built the wall of fire. Marines rose to one knee and braced. Their rifles thundering in crisp, semi-automatic rhythm. Crack, chink. Crack, chink. Crack, chink. The new propellant loads, shipped quietly across the Pacific months earlier, burned clean even in the oppressive island humidity. The rifles stayed cool enough to handle. The gas system stayed smooth. And the action stayed clear of carbon sludge that once choked the chamber after rapid fire. Callahan dropped his binoculars and grabbed his own M1. A Japanese officer broke ahead of the pack, brandishing a gleaming katana. Callahan centered the front sight. Crack. The men dropped instantly. Around him, Marines fired so quickly, and so consistently, that the waves of attackers seemed to slam into an invisible barrier. Every shot was sharp, controlled, reliable. No jams. No misfeeds. No failures to cycle from overheated, fouled powder. Just relentless American firepower. A young Marine, Private Alan Crow, barely 19, fired until his clip pinged empty. He reloaded with trembling hands, but not from fear. From adrenaline. From disbelief at how effortlessly the rifle kept up with him. "Sir," he shouted to Callahan between bursts, "this thing just doesn't quit." Callahan didn't have time to answer before another wave surged from the brush. He spoke anyway. "It's not supposed to." The Japanese charge crashed like surf against rock. But the outcome was never in question. Marine squads, anchored by Garand's functioning at peak performance, cut down attackers with the brutal precision only semi-automatic volume of fire could deliver. A bar team provided support, but the truth was unmistakable. 12 Marines with Garands could put out more effective firepower than a Japanese platoon armed with bolt-action AKAs. Clean burning powder made that possible. Consistent pressure curves made that possible. Gas ports that stayed clear made that possible. A single chemical refinement, one almost nobody outside the ordnance labs even knew about, was rewriting the math of infantry combat. By late morning, the field had fallen silent, except for distant artillery and the rustling of palm fronds in the warm Pacific breeze. The Marines moved cautiously among the fallen. Crow wiped sweat from his eyes and looked down at his rifle. "You saved my life today," he muttered to it. Callahan heard him but didn't laugh. He understood. They all did. Because on islands like Saipan, in hedgerows in France, in forests in Belgium, across deserts, mountains, and city ruins, one truth became undeniable. The M1 Garand wasn't just better now. It was battle-proof. A rifle that could fire hundreds of rounds a day. In mud, in sand, in monsoon rain. In Arctic cold, without hesitation. And that reliability, multiplied across millions of soldiers, reshaped the global balance of firepower. August 2, 1944. Frankfurt Arsenal, Philadelphia. Far from the jungles of Saipan and the hedgerows of France, the world inside the ordnance laboratory was quiet, almost unnervingly so. No gunfire. No shouting. Just the steady hum of ventilation fans and the faint clink of glassware on metal benches. Dr. Edward P. Kingsley removed his wireframe glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Long nights were nothing new. He had spent the last 2 years practically living inside these walls, surrounded by pressure gauges, burn rate graphs, powder samples, and components of the Garand's gas system, spread out like pieces of a puzzle he refused to leave unsolved. He opened a folder stamped Confidential, Propellant Studies, M1 service loads, and scanned the latest field reports. Italy, Normandy, Saipan, the Philippines, Different climates, different terrain. Different ammunition lots, but all of them. Every single report carried the same line. Improved reliability noted with Type 100 series propellant blends. Fouling significantly reduced. Kingsley exhaled slowly. It was working. A rifle in the field didn't lie. Soldiers didn't lie. The data didn't lie. In a small wooden box on his desk sat the first pressure test casing he ever fired with the reformulated powder. He kept it as a reminder of why this had mattered. Why a chemist who would never carry an M1 into combat had fought so hard for precision, consistency, and microscopic improvements no soldier would ever see. The door creaked open. Major Halvorsen, an ordnance officer, who had once dismissed Kingsley's ideas as academic tinkering, stepped inside, holding a dispatch envelope. He looked tired, everyone did that year, but there was something else in his expression. Something approaching respect. Kingsley, he said quietly, you'll want to read this. The chemist opened the envelope. Inside was a letter from a Marine battalion commander on Saipan. Short. Direct. Brutally sincere. Your new propellant saved American lives. My men's rifles stayed in the fight. We held the line because our weapons never quit. Whatever you changed, never undo it. Kingsley read the lines twice, then a third time, feeling the weight of them settle in his chest. The war had taken so much from so many. But here was proof that his work had given something back. Halvorsen cleared his throat. The department's requesting a full-scale shift to your blend. All M1 ammunition production, effective immediately. Kingsley nodded, emotion tightening his throat. Then let's get to work. As Halvorsen turned to leave, he paused in the doorway. For what it's worth, he added, I was wrong about you. The rifle needed this. The men needed this. And then he was gone. Kingsley sat alone in the quiet again, but this time the silence felt different. Not empty. Not remote. It felt connected, to the rifles firing in distant valleys. To the soldiers pushing through mud and sand and jungle. To every American who relied on a weapon that simply could not fail. The M1 Garand was winning battles not because soldiers fought harder, but because Kingsley had made sure their rifle fought with them. Every trigger pull delivered the exact pressure needed. Every gas cycle ran clean. Every clip of 8 worked as intended. A tiny reformulation of powder. A microscopic shift in burn chemistry. But multiplied across millions of rounds. Across continents, across entire campaigns. It had become something else. A strategic advantage. One built not in a general's command tent, but in a quiet lab by a man who never fired a shot in anger. The war wasn't over. But thanks to Kingsley's powder, the Garand was ready for whatever came next. December 24, 1944. Somewhere in the Ardennes. Snow drifted sideways in the freezing wind, catching the faint glow of distant explosions as the battle of the Bulge raged across the dark Belgian forests. Trees cracked under artillery fire. The night sky flickered with orange flashes. And in a shallow foxhole carved hastily into frozen earth, Sergeant Michael Avery brushed ice from the receiver of his M1 Garand. His breath came out in pale clouds. His fingers were numb. But his rifle, his lifeline, ran smooth. Avery listened as German armor clanked in the distance. The grinding of treads echoing through the valley. His platoon was low on everything: warm food, dry socks, and most of all, ammunition. But morale held steady for one reason above all else. Their rifles worked. Always. Private James Horner, shivering beside him, tried to laugh through chattering teeth. Snow's halfway down the barrel, he muttered. And this thing still cycles like a dream. Avery didn't answer at first. He just tugged the operating rod, feeling the bolt glide home like it was greased with warm oil. Not half-frozen residue from 3 days of non-stop fighting. He finally nodded. Yeah. It's the only damn thing out here that doesn't freeze. Across the line, a corporal fired 3 quick shots at movement near the tree line. The rifle snapped with flawless cadence, no sluggish cycle. No binding, no jam from carbon turned to sludge by sub-zero temperatures. Avery imagined, just for a heartbeat, the unseen hands that made that possible. Some chemist in a warm room, solving problems the soldiers didn't even have words for. Some mind that understood pressure curves and gas port erosion, long before any infantryman would ever depend on them. He didn't know Kingsley's name. Almost no one at the front did. But they knew what his work felt like. It felt like confidence at 3 a.m. in a frozen forest. It felt like the difference between pushing back a German assault and being overrun. It felt like survival. Avery peered over the lip of the foxhole. The forest beyond was ghostly, white, silent, eerie. But the quiet didn't last. A flare arced overhead, bathing the snow in harsh light. Then came the shout. Infantry advancing. The Americans braced. Avery raised his Garand. Horner jammed in a fresh clip. And the moment the Germans broke cover, the American line erupted. Crack, 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 ping. Hundreds of M1s fired in perfect mechanical harmony. No hesitation. No misfires. No fouling-induced failures in the worst conditions the European winter could offer. Avery fired until his clip pinged out with that unmistakable metallic ring. He slammed in another. Fired again. And again. By dawn, the snow around their foxholes was churned, dirty, and littered with brass casings steaming gently in the morning cold. The Germans had fallen back. The line had held. Horner slumped against the frozen wall, exhausted. "I swear," he murmured, "this rifle is the only thing keeping us alive." Avery didn't argue. He just rested his glove on the warm barrel and whispered, almost reverently. Someone back home really knew what they were doing. Across the world, from the Ardennes to the Philippines, from Italy to Iwo Jima, the story was the same. The M1 Garand wasn't just reliable now. It was predictable. Consistent. Relentless. Soldiers trusted it with their lives. Often without knowing the quiet, scientific war fought behind the scenes. To make that trust possible. A war fought by a chemist who would never see combat. A man whose name wouldn't appear in headlines, but whose contribution echoed in every battle wherein M1 Garand fired without fail. Because wars are not won by weapons alone. They're won by the invisible hands that make those weapons worthy of the soldiers who carry them. And Kingsley's powder, his clean-burning, cold-weather, battle-hardened innovation, was one of those invisible forces. A microscopic change that reshaped a global war. A chemical breakthrough that turned a good rifle into a war-winning one. A quiet victory that echoed through every thunderous shot fired on the long road to peace.